Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior corporate professional turned entrepreneur, Mr. Deepayan Mohanty. Deepayan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Deepayan is the promoter and managing director of Hemera Global, which is a commodity trading firm. He's worked for Cargill for 14 years. So Deepayan, let's talk about Hemera today. Tell me about this venture and what was your motivation to start it?
So Hemera is a 11 years old global supply chain solution platform.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the meaning of Hemera is daylight. And when I started off, always thought about fresh ideas, innovations. And so we provide the solutions to the clients through three separate verticals, one being procurement and, distribution of commodity and product across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a vertical which supports and complements this effort by providing supply chain financing.
Mm-hmm.
Through our trade finance fund that we run in US, and then we also represent a German bank in Asia.
Mm.
And thirdly, we have a very strong vertical on advisory, which provides supply chain risk management advisory, treasury management advisory, and turnaround strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So, the motivation to start this, I remember way long back when I was in 20s and in Tata Steel, when once we were having a discussions among friends, and we were saying, okay, what do you want to be 10 year, 20 year down the line? And the answers were coming, be a divisional manager or a general manager. And that didn't really fit in my philosophy. So I went to do MBA from IIM. And then a second kind of thought process came to me when I was in late 30s. And with all the exposures, global exposures I was holding, and this question came, am I going to retire and earn some superannuations, once I'm 60? Then answer was no. I wanted to create a platform of value, impart knowledge to young generations, and in the process also, attract good people to come and join the platform and, earn return out of it, and also be happy, by contributing to the knowledge to the market. Yeah. That's what I'm here.
Fascinating. So, you have spent 3 decades in commodities. I'd love to get your perspective over how commodities have grown across the whole world and how easy or more difficult it has become to trade.
Well, I think there are many areas and huge amount of changes have come. But the biggest being the technology. Look at the technology. You find, today we're talking about high-speed internet. Email itself has become a passe. Virtual world. We are talking on Zoom, being far away from each other, and blockchain technology being the latest that has brought a lot of transparency and diminishing fraud in the system. We have things like cryptocurrencies, which all digitalized, even currencies, various assets being digitalized, which are being traded across the world. Compared to this, when I think back, early 90s, when I was a trader that time, very fondly I remember, Ashutosh, that in our international office as a trader, and that time I used to find that very interesting, okay, as a high tech. Used to be the communication mode used to be faxes and telex. And
correct.
The office would have a telex, center, and a trader would actually have a physical pipe, going all through the desk. And when you want to send a message to the other trader globally, we used to write a check and then put into the pipe. The pipe used to operate through, that air suction pressure.
Yeah.
It will go to the center, and that's how the communication used to be. So technology is one big thing, which has also got the speed in decision making, your transparency in prices. The second thing, as you know, the derivative markets has really picked up. Today, it's even equal or even larger than the physical market globally. And the unifications of the global market, we see that the unifications of African market has never been as it used to be earlier. It has really grown. Technology, infrastructural development, these are all a massive change and shift.
Correct.
in the whole trading scenario. Yeah.
Very well said. And you're so right. I mean, when I remember with ITC Global, the challenges used to be very different. I mean, how do you get information to move from one place to the other was a big challenge.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Technology has made a big difference. But, coming back to what you were saying about your being, a global supply chain solutions platform. When I was reading about you, you directly impact lives of farmers because of all the commodities that you're picking up. What are some of the key supply chains in our country?
Well, Ashutosh, you hit a very, very important point, let's say, around farmers. I would like to spend a little, time to talk about my views around what the realities around agriculture sector and farmers in India. Right? See, agricultural sector is the lowest yielding sector in the country today.
Correct.
From the farmer's perspective, as you really know, it's highly cluttered, highly complex, and this industry or sector constitutes of 15% of the GDP today. I mean, during our independence time, it used to be more than 50%, and it has 60% of the workforce which are deployed here. So effectively, though there's not a direct extrapolations on this, but you can imagine that half the population of India earning 1/6 of the income. Right? If you look at the lands, the lands are not really, the return on the lands are not really as attractive as a farmer will get if he has to build a factory on it or a school on it. Right? And then and then the MSPs which are decided by the government, that doesn't take consideration of the land return. So the folk to farm gate gap in India, is as high as 65 to 90%. I mean, if you compare that with France, it is only 10%. Indonesia is 20%. This says there is a large amount of value that get lost in the system that goes to the, let's say, middleman, or there are a lot of wastages, which brings to the supply chain problem, right? And today, everyone talks about food safety. Nobody talks about nutrition in India. So look at the states like Punjab and Haryana, where there is a vested interest there, because when the FCI picks up that extra surplus grains, there are sales that goes to the state government, and there are a lot of earning the state government gets out of it, right? So due to all this, farmer doesn't get the encouragement in India to even produce alternate crops. They all stick to, not India, I would say rather few states, not like going into production of vegetable or go to, for that matter, poultry. So they don't do that, right? We continue to have the restrictive and outdated, the act like Essential Commodity Act, right? Which also brings in a fear in a warehouse manager that why should I build a warehouse if tomorrow government says you can't store a commodity beyond certain value or an amount. Then, we have been talking about the crop insurance, the crop financing. We're talking about roadways, the warehouses nearer to the farmland. All those things are being talked about, efforts are being taken, but we haven't really seen these things are really picked up. So all these are contributing to, I would say, the cluttered days in this particular segment. One, thing probably you'll agree with me is, instead of going through all these subsidies, which are going in a very indirect way in India, if a direct subsidies can be given to the farmers, you give them money, let them decide what to buy with it, but do everything at the market price. That might bring in all these issues, and real spending could happen on the areas which require to be spent.
Amazing.
I mean, you look at even countries like Pakistan and China, they are doing the direct subsidies to the farmers. So yeah, these are a few.
Amazing. I never looked at it from that perspective, but you're probably right. Give money directly in their hands, and then let them take a call.
Absolutely.
But another thing that I've been noticing with a lot of the large commodity companies is that they're making an entry into the branded segments, branded goods, or branded goods segments. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
So, well, I would say the forward integration, reaching out to the customer is the call of the day. In fact, not today. In early 2000 in Kargil, we had started, we have started a brand called Nature Fresh, which, we were earlier to that, we were only supplying, for example, edible oil to a few refineries in India, and that's it. We were and doing the supply chain risk management. Then we felt the real game is to move toward the branding and move to the market. So we created the brand, and then we did the same thing around fertilizer, the branding and plus the packaging, because that's where the real returns are coming from, and many global companies and Indian companies are moving into that. So,
and is Hemera doing the same?
See, Hemera is not operating on that segment. Of course, we are into the segment of what, as I said, in the international trade, and complement our business by providing supply chain financing and the advisory. So we bring in our value in the process of providing a portfolio of service to the international customers. Not really gone into the branding side as yet.
Okay, I love your comment, as yet.
Yeah.
And you're right, nobody knows the future. But Deepayan, tell me, India is such a large agricultural economy. How significant a player are we in the commodity trading world?
Well, in the context of commodity trading, let me. I always, when I think about trading, please remember that India had a mindset of being negative towards the global traders till 90s. East India Company came to India 300 years back and they started ruling India. So the mindset of trading was quite negative till we actually crossed 90s, when you remember, Ashutosh, that from your ITC time, and that there used to be a FIPB approval which was required for the global companies to come in. Right? And subsequently, it has fallen under the automatic route.
Correct.
Now, India has grabbed that opportunity today with the presence of almost every global trading company in India. Similarly, the Indian trading companies, like say Tata International, or even like some manufacturing companies like Vedanta, has gone and acquired the companies outside. So at the same time, you find the Indians, has taking very senior roles in global companies. Globally, the CXO roles are coming there. Indian infrastructures has changed, no doubt. The free trade zones have come up. And more importantly, the country risk of India has drastically become better. You see today, India is the fourth largest country in the world holding the forex reserve, like 640 billion.
Yeah.
Now the country risk changing, that brings in the liquidity to the trade finance supply chain. Latest, also we are seeing that the global manufacturing base also shifting to India with post-COVID.
Correct.
China effect, right?
Correct.
So, so India has really taken a large, participation in the global trade today with all these things happening. Yeah.
Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, because I think a lot of money is being spent on infrastructure in India. But I'd love to get your perspective. That I've often read that a lot of grain is lost because of poor warehousing. And I know that a lot of the private sector has got into warehousing. What is your view on that?
Well, I think when we talk about warehousing, we need to differentiate industrial warehousing, farm sector warehousing, perishable, non-perishable. I do agree with you. The warehousing standard in India has been pretty bad. And let me correct. I mean, it much more left desired to be done.
Correct.
But definitely there are a lot of activities happening. But on the industrial side, we are not doing that bad. But on the perishable and agricultural side, there is definitely a gap on quantity and quality of warehouses. Well, let's talk about per capita warehouse space in India today. The figure I was reading the other day is 0.022 square meters per capita. Okay, wow. The same figure is 0.88 in China and 4.4 in US, which means that China warehouse per capita is 40 times more than India, and US is 200 times more than India. So there's a huge gap to be really captured out there. Number of warehouse companies in India is, say, 500. The same number is 11,000 in US. So that's one side to really understand about the potential of warehouse that where we can lead to. But the other side to feel happy about is, if you look back 2017, the warehouse space, the number that came in warehouse space in India was a 1.2 million square meters. Okay. The number in 2021 has become 3.2 million square meters.
Okay.
The projection of 2026 is 7.6 million square meters. So the year-on-year growth projected of 15% is something which looks very promising. I just need to, on top of that, Ashutosh, add that it is not only about the infrastructure of warehouses. 2007, the law was changed to make warehouse receipts as a negotiable instrument. Okay. And then subsequently, we talked about digitalizing the warehouse receipts. The right steps has been taken. Now, question is how much the banks are accepting these warehouse receipts.
Correct.
And bring in the liquidity in the supply chain.
Right.
So that the storage ability and the intent of farmers and the supply chain players goes up. That would make the biggest change that we could really be looking for in India.
Wonderful. Wonderful. The next question related to infrastructure is that a lot of money is being spent on, of course, road transportation with much better roads. But more recently, I've been reading that river transportation is something which is being talked about a lot. Now, most major countries do have a lot of river transportation. We've had our challenges with our rivers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, definitely today, if you look at the road transportation, 65% of the goods in India gets transported through roads.
Correct.
There has been major focus on the roads. I mean, there has been, of course, the ministry figure says that in last 7 years, almost 50% more the highways has been built. That's the figure we read. Now, despite that, there are congestion on the road. Despite there are congestion on the railways. So the river transportation, and especially in a country like India, can definitely add and ease the transportation process in the country. Globally, it has happened when we pick up, let's say, coal from Indonesia. We see that hinterland transport through rivers and to the waterway is there. Yeah, it's definitely a welcoming step if really picked up. I have no view actually that how long it's going to take.
Okay, so, fair enough, fair enough. So one more question relating to the supply chain business before I come to my last question on your private equity fund that you have.
Sure.
What, in your opinion, does the government need to do to help companies and businesses like yours?
See, I think one of the biggest thing that we look for is more, transparency in the regulations. Leave less for the interpretation. More you leave for the interpretation, more we get the bureaucracy, sitting on and try to interpret and just the hassle factor. So the transparency, okay. The second one would be more aligned to how we see, the global trade operates in countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai. Because there is a huge potential to grow. Why can't India be a global center of global trade?
Correct.
Why India need to really pick up, only talk about physical import and exports? We operate from Singapore and do large amount of global trade sitting in Singapore. Why those revenues cannot be captured in India? So, if you talk about, I'm talking on an Indian perspective. I think that's what I guess you're asking, right?
Sure.
What the government can do.
Yeah.
So those are ones, and then making the cross-border regulations around, fund flow, around the banking, and maybe they could do a little bit, which they are trying to work on. We need to really see how the likes of cryptocurrencies and all become a medium of, trading. Again, I can't say good or bad, but these are all as the global countries are tuning themselves up, India need to stay ahead of curve there, and rather than being behind.
Very interesting. So I'm going to now move to the last segment of our conversation. You've just mentioned as we started that you manage funds for private investors focusing on supply chains. Tell me a little more about this and how this works.
So we have a small fund in US, which AUM being below 50 million. The idea of the fund is the twofold. Of course, in addition to give the return to the LPs, we make this fund as participating in a supply chain financing along with larger funds. So we put the skin in the game by providing 5 to 10% exposure that we take on overall supply chain financing. These funds doesn't focus particularly in any country like India, but it does supply chain financing on a global basis. And we have done financing in Hong Kong-based company, China, Chinese companies. We have done that with European companies. So it enhances our appeal for serving the supply chain, by endorsing a risk, right? Which is other than the same time giving the right return to the LPs, which has worked very beautifully for us. So that we don't actually come in there just as an advisor or just as a trader. We come in there as even participating on a supply chain finance.
Amazing. Deepayan, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for talking to me at such length about Hemera and all the amazing work you are doing there. You actually took me back to the mid-90s when I was, working in the commodity space for a little while. But thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Pleasure being on your show.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.